Hello everyone, I'm Janine Kakmar with PHTV Channel 4 Palos Heights, back with our show all about books. And on the show, you know, we talk about books, authors, writing and publishing, and we'll have a special guest with us to talk about what they're reading. And today we do have a special guest with us. We have retired pediatrician, humanitarian, and Chicago Magazine's 2016 Chicagoan of the Year, Dr. John Kaler. But before we get to visit with him, we're going to touch base on some of the new releases coming out in November and December, and then we'll get to go back and visit. So let's talk about some of the new releases coming up. Of course, we can't talk about all of them. We don't have all that time, but we're going to touch base on some of the ones that are getting a lot of press this for November and December. The first one being The Artemis by Andy Weir. Now, if some of you are familiar with that title's name, the author's name, excuse me, you'll recognize him as the author of the best-selling novel, The Martian, that came out a couple of years ago and is actually made into a movie that came out starring Matt Damon. And the author uses the same type of sense of humor in his new book. It's an irresistible thriller that's set on the moon. It's a heist novel, actually, a heist story set on the moon. Artemis is the colony on the moon, and stars a kick-butt, wisecracking female lead, Jazz Bashira. And she lives, of course, on Mars with, the moon, with everybody, and she works as a porter, but she also supplements her income as a smuggler of contraband. And when she's approached on a job to make some quick money, she realizes that she's just stepped into a hornet's nest of conspiracy and trouble. But very much like his first book, The Martian, Andy Weir weaves a story that's, first of all, laugh out loud funny at parts, has a lot of cool science in it, just like The Martian did, and a very strong character, very resourceful character. So we're looking forward to reading Artemis by Andy Weir when that comes out. If you haven't read The Martian yet, definitely go back and read that one before that. They're not related, but you got to read that book. It's a great one, even if you've seen the movie. Our next feature title is The Last Suppers by Mandy Mikulenchek. Now this book is a beautifully written, emotional, moving novel that reminds us of both The Help and Dead Man Walking. And it's a story about a woman whose quest to provide meals for the death row prisoners leads her down a path to secrets that she finds out about her life. It takes place in the 1950s in Louisiana, on a Louisiana penitentiary, and Ginny, the main character, is the cook at the prison where she grew up on the grounds because her father was the warden. He was actually murdered, but Jenny has stayed on as the cook, and one of her jobs is to provide the last meals for those death row prisoners. She does that as a way of honoring their humanity, but when Ginny stumbles upon some information about the man that was executed for killing her father, it opens up a whole bunch of dark and painful memories for her, and she realizes that the truth, justice, and mercy are not as simple as she once thought. Now, once again, this being set in the 50s, this book actually has a lot of themes that are relevant today regarding, prison treatment of prisoners, the death penalty, and the impartiality of trials. And it's been reviewed as a haunting study on race relations and is a recommended read. So that's one to put on your list as well. Our next feature title is a nonfiction book titled Bunk: The Rise of Hoaxes, Humbugs, Plagiarists, Phonies, Post-Facts, and Fake News by Kevin Young. Now this author, he's a poet and a scholar, and he set out to take a look at the history of a hoax. And yes, the subtitle refers to a lot of the things that are going currently in our political climate, but the book actually starts off in the 19th century when he takes a look at P.T. Barnum, Edgar Allan Poe, author Conan Doyle, and he pulls back history's curtain to reveal the hoaxes and humbugs and the circus tents with the sideshow of spiritualism and sensationalism. And in the book, the author talks about the theory of a hoax, which is something that unites a cunning speaker with a crowd that wants to be fooled. But today, something like this has, stakes are even higher today. the author does draw a connection from the past that he talks about to the 21st century climate of truthiness and fake news. And he examines the effects of deception on American politics, literature, and everyday life. Now, this book was actually shortlisted for the National Book Award, and it's been reviewed as a very powerful read. So you got to put that on your list or someone's Christmas list for the holidays. Our next nonfiction title is It's All Relative by A.J. Jacobs. And for those of you who don't know this author, he's a journalist, a lecturer, a New York Times bestselling author, and he's also a self-described human guinea pig. And he says that because of the research he does for his books. He once spent 18 months reading the entire Encyclopedia Britannica in an effort to learn everything there was in the world. And in researching his other book, New York Times bestselling book, The Year of Living Biblically, he attempted to follow the hundreds of rules that he found in the Bible. Now, with his new book, titled It's All Relative, he undergoes an hilarious, heartfelt quest to understand what constitutes family and where it begins and how far it goes. And he attempts to untangle the true meaning of the family of humankind. Now, he got started on this book idea when he received a strange email from someone who told him, "You don't know me, I'm your 8th cousin, and we have over 80,000 relatives in our database." And Jacobs is like, okay, that's enough people to fill the Madison Square Garden 4 times over. And he's got to thinking, like, who are these people and how do I find them? So he spent the next 3 years on an adventure of trying to build the biggest family tree in history. And this adventure took him across 7 continents. He had a beer with the U.S. president. I don't know which one. You'll have to read and find out. He sang with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And he unearthed some links to some Hollywood actresses and actors and even some real-life scoundrels because, as we all know, you can choose your friends but not your family. But Jacob upends our understanding of genetics and genealogy, tradition and tribalism, identity and connection in a meaningful and often hilarious way. And in his book, it's a fascinating look at the bonds that connect us all. And hey, you know, the holidays are coming. This might be a great book for you guys to sit down with your family and read. Find out who you're all connected to. Our final feature title that we'll talk about today is coming out in December, is titled The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden. And this one I'm really excited about. This is actually the sequel to her first book that came out 2 years ago, I believe, The Bear and the Nightingale. So if you haven't read that one, you got to read this one first before you get to The Girl in the Tower. So you can get started now. But these books are kind of a fairy tale for grown-ups, and they're set in the countryside of Russia with this impetuous character, Vasya Petronova. The magical adventure began in The Bear and the Nightingale when Vasya was orphaned and was cast out of her village as a witch. And her options were few at that point. She could either go off to the convent and live life in the tower, or allow her older sister to make a match for her for some wealthy Muscovite. Neither of those were anything she wanted to do, because her desire was to explore the world. So she decides to disguise herself as a boy and rides off through the woods to escape her village. And while she's escaping, she comes across these bandits that were terrorizing the countryside, and she does battle with them and defeats them, and it gains the attention of the Grand Prince of Moscow. And she realizes she has to be very careful about her identity now. She's not who the prince thinks she is. She needs to remain in his good graces, and all the while there's a force that is threatening the village, the city, or the whole kingdom actually, and Vasya knows that she's the only one that can stop it. So the book is full of great characters, and these are great reads. I mean, I initially had no interest in reading The Bear and the Nightingale. I said, oh, I'll just pick it up. Everybody keeps talking about it. And I was really pulled into it, and that's just a good sign of the great characters that you'll read about. So those are some of the feature titles that are coming out in November and December. And of course, we're going to touch on, you'll see a couple slides of our New York Times bestsellers that will be coming out. And of course, these are some of the names of authors that are very easily recognizable. Lee Child, in November, Lee Child is coming out with his new Jack Reacher book titled The Midnight Line. Janet Ivanovich is out with Hardcore 24. Clive Cussler has his new book in the Oregon series titled Typhoon Fury. And many favorites, David Baldacci is out with his newest Will Roby series titled Endgame. For December's New York Times bestsellers, we have James Rollins out with The Demon Crown. Jennifer Chiaverini is out with her new historical fiction, and this one's actually a story about Lord Byron's daughter, who became the world's first computer programmer, and a female at the same time, in the early 1800s, and that's titled Enchantress of Numbers. And Robert Cray's newest book in the investigator Albus Cole and his partner Joe Pike series called The Wanted. And Nora Roberts is out with her new book, Year One. So there you have some of the new titles coming out in November and December, just in time for the holidays. You could get those for those you love or for yourself and treat yourself. But now we get to visit with our guest, Dr. John Kaler. John, thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
I know John from when he was working at Palos Park, and he would come in. But John is a retired pediatrician. He retired in January of 2017 from his pediatric practice. He has spent the last 20 years working, serving the poor in short-term medical missions in Africa, Central and Latin America, Mexico. He was active in Haiti before, during, and after the earthquake. And since 2015, he was active in the support of the Syrian refugees. He's worked with refugees in Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and Greece. And in June of 2016, along with two other colleagues, Dr. Kaler went to Aleppo, Syria, and was the last, with his two other colleagues were the last Westerners to leave Aleppo before it fell, which earned him and his colleagues the Chicago Magazine's 2016 Chicagoans of the Year Award. And he's also was honored with the award of Bush Foundation Daily Points of Light. In June of this year, Dr. Kaler, along with Dr. Salul and Dr. Shivaraju, established an international medical NGO called MedGlobal, Inc., with the goal of having world without health disparity. And since its inception, Dr. Kaler has been to Yemen, and he actually just came back last week from Bangladesh to serve those who were displaced by the Rohingya exodus. So John, again, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
It's an incredible list of places that you've been to and people that you served. Tell us how you got started with this.
Well, I've always liked to travel, and I've come from a background. I was raised in Catholic school, went to all-boys Catholic high school, Joliet Catholic, and we had a real social mission at that time, and so I carried that forward. I was married with children in college and in medical school, so I didn't have a lot of effort, a lot of time to travel.
Yeah.
Once I got into practice, though, I was able to work. I trained at Cook County Hospital, stayed at Cook County Hospital for 34 years, treating the underserved there, and then had a practice on the side.
Okay.
I was lucky to have colleagues of mine that didn't care when I went.
Okay.
And so I had the luxury of being able to do short-term work at that time.
Okay.
Went to Latin America, spent a lot of time in Mexico, went to Africa. The change in my life came, though, in 2010.
Okay.
In Haiti, after the earthquake. I was able to get down there within a few weeks. Worked with a large group. Worked at the public hospital down there, and that experience was moving. But what was more moving was I went back at 3 months after the earthquake. Went back at 6 months after the earthquake, and really realized that time, when I was back there at 6 months, I was seeing a family, and I had this level of anger in me at that moment.
Anger at the...
I was angry at their government. If I would have written my name on one of the bricks, it would have still been in the same place when I came back 6 months later.
Oh, wow.
And I was angry at my government. I was angry at their government. I was angry at a God that you know, how could a God let this happen? And I was railing at all this and just burning up with anger. And I looked down, and the woman, it was a woman with a kid who had come to see me. She'd waited 5 hours to see me.
Oh, wow.
With this kid. And at that point, there was something that had never happened to me before. Something washed over me. I don't know if it was grace. I don't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
But it dawned on me that all these worries that I was angry about were things way, way out of my league. I had no control over what Bill Clinton did with his money. I had no control over what the government did with his money. But what I did have control over was my interaction with this woman sitting in front of me. And I've never had that anger back again.
Really?
I've been able to be in places that were as messed up as could conceivably be, but was able to concentrate on those things that of the heart that I was able to do, and realize that's actually what all of this work should have been about. My ego was much too involved in it early on, but I've lost that.
Wow.
Unfortunately, there was a level of that came back, not in Yemen, but in Bangladesh. I just got back from Bangladesh and working with the Rohingya, you know, an ethno-religious minority that's been persecuted and have been driven out in exodus across the border to Bangladesh, and you know you're in trouble when Bangladesh is your go-to place. So,
Right.
you know.
Jeez.
And it was probably, I don't know, at least 600,000 people in a area the size of probably Palos Park.
Oh.
And there was one road, and there was a lot of stuff, but I found myself, again, not concentrating on the specifics of what was in front of me, but starting to feel this level of existential anger that I thought I had lost. So it's a trial getting it back, but the work is rewarding. The people are the most as needy as can conceivably be, and it is still early in the evolution of the crisis, and so it's still very chaotic, a lot of energy, and I kind of like that.
Okay. So I know in the past you were just in Syria, in Aleppo, and you were working with the, which group were you with then?
In Syria, we were with the Syrian American Medical Society.
Okay. And you went there to help the physicians.
Well, it was, so we were in Greece. I was in Greece working with, so the Exodus, the Syrian Exodus has several phases to it. The third phase was people who didn't get out when they could have gotten out.
Okay.
And now had to spend a lot of their money, all of their money actually, and take their life in their hands and cross the Mediterranean. So that was the phase when you saw that little Ian Carey, his body in the wakes. I mean, that was that era.
Okay.
And so I went to Greece to work with the Syrian American Medical Society. Went to Greece to work with that population, and was at the border, was at the Montenegro-Greek border when they shut the border down. See, the plan had been the exodus was from Turkey to the islands, from the islands to the mainland, from the mainland north to Europe. Well, the Montenegro border was closed, and a camp built up behind it of probably close to 20,000 people within 3 weeks.
Oh my!
And so I was spending time there, and while I was there was a episode where this was right as Aleppo, the Russians had just gotten involved in the affair, in the Syrian affair, and they were starting to bomb Aleppo daily, targeting hospitals, targeting markets, targeting physicians. And there was a episode where the quote unquote the last pediatrician in Aleppo was killed. And it touched me for any numbers of reasons. And it just so happened that the executives from SAMS were there making a tour, and I pulled one aside and I said, send me to Aleppo. I'm a pediatrician. What better person to go to bear witness to this than have no Syrian blood in me? I am a pediatrician. I'm the grandfather of 12. I've done I've done this work. What better person to go and bear witness to the personal struggle that's going on? I'm a pediatrician. I can do some help. I can do advocacy work when I come back. And they said, no, it's too dangerous. We won't send you. And I just kept, sometimes I can be a pain in the butt, which is not a surprise to most people. And I just kept bugging them. Until finally Dr. Salul, who at that time was the head of SANS Global Response, which is who we're in Greece with, said, okay, well, I'll go with you. And then we got one other person, and we went.
And they're from Chicago area as well?
They're both from Chicago.
Okay.
Zahir is the head of the intensive care unit at Christ.
Okay.
And Dr. Samir Attar is an orthopedic surgeon from Northwestern.
Okay.
And we were there. We had to leave probably a week earlier than we did because the word came out that the Syrian forces with the Russian aid were about to close the road. It was called the Road of Death. It's called the Costello Road, which was the only road in and out. And so at 4 in the morning, we packed up and under fire left and came back to Turkey. And it was that. You know, it was interesting that getting honored, a lot of honors came forward to that, and it was ridiculous. I mean, the heroes are those physicians in Aleppo. So this was Ramadan, and half of the physicians who were there, surgeons and that, would be leaving to go back to see their families either in Turkey or there, and half would stay. The siege happened, closed the road over. These doctors who were outside of Aleppo, safe, walked back into Aleppo to be with their colleagues, to be with their patients. These are the heroes, and they were the most amazing group of people I've ever met.
I know that when you spoke at the library last summer about this, you talked about how killing their doctors were targeted because if they got rid of you.
Hospitals were targeted, doctors were targeted. The saying is, you kill a civilian, you kill a civilian. You kill a doctor, you kill 1,000 civilians. The numbers might not be correct. The feeling
but
is
the
correct.
idea is the same, absolutely.
So 3 months after we were gone, after we left, so the population knew the siege was coming. They built up they cached supplies and stuff for what they thought would be a 6-month siege. Well, you never can plan for these things, and so the supplies ran out at about 4 months. The bombings continued along, and then in December, finally, the Aleppo fell completely, and people were forced to evacuate. But by that time, all the hospitals had been bombed out, and surgeries were being performed in people's apartments.
Oh my gosh.
C-sections were being performed at the person's house with flashlights and very little anesthesia. It was a terrible situation, terrible situation. And people say, well, was the stuff you saw in Bangladesh worse? And it's a whole different structure. I mean, Aleppo is 5,000 years old. I mean, it's one of the major cities in the world. In Burma, in Myanmar, the Rohingya were kept in a northern province, and they just had small villages. So when the military came in, they just burned the villages. So there was no destruction. It was just burn the villages, rape the women, and shoot the men. So there was more desperation in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Less destruction back in Myanmar, but significantly more desperation. This was an exodus of biblical proportion. I mean, this is the population. In Syria, people left back and forth. There's 6 million displaced, but this is 6 million out of a population of 27 million.
Right.
This is 1.2 million out of a population of 1.2 million of them.
Oh my.
So this is Syria was not ethnic cleansing. What's happening in Myanmar is ethnic cleansing. Probably could fit the definition of genocide, but that's a whole different story. There's no question about that.
So you started Med Global.
So 6 months ago, Dr. Shivaraju, Dr. Salul, and myself decided that we really needed that we needed to be in an organization. International NGO. NGO stands for non-governmental organization, for those who don't know. So by definition, you're apolitical.
Okay.
we're a humanitarian organization and a medical organization, and we wanted to be non-regional. I mean, when we were Syrian American Medical Society, by Syria was Syria and the Mideast were the focus. We wanted to be non-sectarian, not aligned with any particular government. I'm not aligned with any religious group or non-religious group. And we wanted to be agile. We wanted to be small enough that we could go where the crises were, because we knew these crises would come up quickly. So Yemen isn't quick, and neither was Myanmar. I mean, these were coming for a period of time, but they reach a breaking point.
Okay.
And we want to be able to respond to that type of thing. We went to Puerto Rico after the earthquake.
Really?
Yeah.
The hurricane?
After the hurricane.
Yeah.
I said earthquake.
Yeah.
After the hurricane. Yeah. So we were there within the first couple of weeks and stayed for a couple of weeks, and then truly Puerto Rico doesn't need more physicians down there. They need electricity and carpenters, and so with that we moved out.
Right. Well, with all you do, it's hard to think that you have time to read.
Well, being retired now, I actually have more time to read when I'm back here, and I spend a lot of time in the air and in airports, unfortunately.
I mean, I know you're a big reader. So, what are some of the things that you like to read?
All right. Well, I brought a couple of things. I guess the first one probably, and most of my reading is nonfiction. I listen to audiobooks religiously for fiction because it's I read fiction the same way I read nonfiction, which is just with my left brain. There's no color to it. And so about 25 years ago, I found unabridged audiobooks, and it was like heaven. I mean, having someone read to you like a kid, it was wonderful. Now, you spend a lot more time in the car than I do now.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the first book that I read over the past few months is something called by Sam Quinones called Dreamland. Okay. It is the popular work on the opioid epidemic. It's a nonfiction book, and though it reads like a novel.
Oh, really?
And the chapters alternate. They do a story of the gang from Mexico that he particularly dealt with in California. Excuse me, California and Ohio was one of the first gangs producing the heroin that became the follow-up to the pills. Okay. And that's the drill. It's the pills. They get expensive. They go from the pills to heroin. Heroin kills you. Okay. That's when you see these things on TV. That's what's been happening. Anyway, so the book alternates this story of the gangs, the structure of the gangs and the gangs, alternates that with a discussion about opioids. So if you have if you have a scientific bent that you want to know more about this is a great book. It's written for laymen. If you don't, you can just skip every other chapter because and deal with the specifics.
So multiple stories.
And this is obviously it has cogency and import to now. Just as
very relevant.
Yeah, just as an aside, I will say one of the things that frustrates a lot of us that have been involved in the inner city for many, many years, is you didn't see this type of book with the crack epidemic. You saw books about jail, and crack devastated our communities, devastated them from the beginning to end, but you didn't see there was no sympathetic bent to that. There was lock them up, throw away the key, 3 strikes, you're out. There was all that stuff. No sympathetic bent to that. I'm glad. I'm certainly glad that there is now. But those of us who have been involved in that community for a long time are relatively frustrated about that. Second book, relevant to some of the work I do, is called The Shell by Mustafa Khalifa. It's a novel. It's his first book, and it's the story of a 30-some-year-old Syrian expat who has gone to contemporaneous, has gone to Europe to study. Okay. Essentially to leave and to study. He's gone to Paris. And he's not a Muslim, he's a Christian. and he feels pretty protected because he's a Christian. And the story is, as he comes back into Syria to Damascus to see his family, for some reason or the other, I think it's a wedding or something, I don't remember now, he gets arrested. And he gets arrested and thrown in the what's called the Tadmor prison. Tadmor prison is the prison that had a lot of press about it within the past year, excuse me, about the furnaces where prisoners were killed and then burned. Thousands, excuse me, thousands of them.
Yeah. Now this is a fictionalized.
This is a novel,
okay.
But it's the most chilling novel I've read dealing with prison. It does. If prison is probably 100 times worse than described in this novel, and if this novel described it as hell, and it is. It's. If you want to get a feel for what prisoners of conscience go through in Syria, read this book.
Okay.
It's a short read. It's his first novel, and I mean it's excellent.
All right.
The next one is a book by Azim Ibrahim called The Rohingyas, and it is the work on the Rohingya crisis that policymakers, humanitarians read.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons. One, it's a very good read. The second is it's the only one around right now that deals with the crisis from beginning to. It was written in 2014, so it takes
It's very recent.
Yeah, it takes it to pretty close to now, and it's prescient. Meaning, if you see some of the things he's predicting could tip it over to where we're at now, every one of them has come through. Every one of them has come through.
Oh my.
And Azim happens to be a friend of mine. His wife is on Med Global's board. He is a brilliant man, and it is an excellent read. It gives you some history, or it gives you a good historical context about Myanmar and Burma and how this situation came about. And if anybody's interested, so it's a few hundred pages long, but it really is only 150 pages of text. He's such. It looks like. I got to ask him. It looks like it was a PhD dissertation. I mean, it is so documented. It's beyond belief.
Okay. So something definitely we could learn about.
This is like if you like the New Yorker, you know that length of an article of a long form journalism. This'll be, and it reads, and he's humorous. It's hard to figure out where humor fits into this, but he is humorous, and he is informed. Good man. You'll hear him speaking. You'll see him speaking a lot around.
Okay.
And it's
We'll
worth going to hear him. Trouble is, he's got this brogue. He's from the UK. Grew up in Scotland. And he's got this brogue that unless you know what he's talking about, you'll have a hard time.
Oh, maybe we'll read the book.
No, that's exactly. Read the book first.
All right.
The other book that I brought, though, just as an aside before we talk about this book, I wanted to say, can you imagine being A.J. Jacobs and spending however many years it took him to read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica and to learn
18
everything?
months.
And then Google came along and no longer everything you ever wanted to know was in
except you got to find that information,
that's
which is the
true.
real source.
That's
the trick on Google, as we
I
all
was
know.
just when you said that, I thought, oh, Lord.
Yeah, I like the idea of him living biblically, for a whole year.
That's,
all of the rules, the hundreds of rules.
Yeah, it's amazing because I've heard him referenced on that before, and it's just amazing how many little things you gotta pay attention to. And I mean, I couldn't last for half a week.
Right.
The other one I wanted to mention, though, is actually the cream of the crop, as far as I'm concerned. And this is by Siddhartha Mukherjee, and it's called The Gene: An Intimate History. And it's a tome. You can see it's 500 and some pages of text, but it reads like a well-written novel.
Absolutely.
And those of you who might have read his first book called The Emperor of All Maladies. Emperor of All Maladies won a Pulitzer.
Yeah.
And it was about the history of cancer.
Right.
And again, you see that and you go, oh, goodness.
Boring.
Why would I want to read this?
Who want to get depressed?
It was a wonderful, wonderful read. And this book is similar.
We talked about this book on our show back when it first came
Oh,
out
did you?
earlier this year, and I did listen to it afterwards. It's fascinating. The author, as I was telling you, his mother was a twin, or his twin was a twin.
Was a twin.
And which, of course, I have in common with that. But he makes it, it's such an easy read, but you're learning such incredible things. I kept like reciting things that I learned to my husband.
That's right.
Oh my God, you have to read this. Did you know this?
Well, it's interesting because even for someone like myself who I mean, I've been through all of this. So I actually, you know, this history, it was history that I came forward with, not some of the old stuff, not Mendel, of course, but the history was stuff that, the medical history was stuff that I came through with. I mean, I was in medical school in 1969, so all of this stuff was stuff that evolved in my clinical world, and it's told perfectly. And even to the point where I was recently in Lebanon, and I was recently in Lebanon for a month and was seeing patients, and there was a patient that came with intersex. Intersex is ambiguous genitalia.
Okay.
Now this patient was probably 2 years old, 3 years old.
Okay.
Oh no, I'm sorry. This patient was actually a lot older. This patient was 12.
Oh.
And he had first been raised as a boy.
Okay.
Then they decided they'd raise the child as a girl. Then they decided they would do surgery, raise it as a boy again. And so the question came to me about, well, what should we do? Well, when I was trained, the rule was, when I was in training, and the rule I carried through my clinical practice, was that these decisions needed to be made by the time the child was a year, because that was when, by that time, you would assume you had incorporated your sexual identity, and you would carry that forward.
Okay.
So, all right. Mukherjee and studies in this completely dismiss that, and so it was actually something that I learned. I mean, it has to do more with your genetic. Your sexual identity has to do more with your genetic identity. Okay. Than we had thought in those days. And so it's fascinating to the point where I had to contact the medical students who were with me, who I gave this dogmatic lecture to.
He said, hey, better read this book.
And correct myself on that. But it is, I can't, the last 100 pages of it deal with the future.
Right.
And as he mentions so precisely, this future is not 100 years from now. This future is years from now.
In our lifetime.
And a lot of the things that we dismiss as not being able. So when I was in training, we dismissed the Genome Project as ludicrous. You'll never be able to do this. Again, very arrogantly, never be able to do this, drinking more coffee. And of course, then it was done. And so with a lot of the things they talk about with regards to post-genomic life, meaning when can we intervene in the genome prior to that? I mean, in the ethics, the science is there. The techniques are changing to get it more easy, but there's not a question that the science is there. And so the ethics around that are just fascinating. And he deals with them quite well.
So the history, ethics, you know.
Oh, it's a great read. I mean, it's a long read. I can confess.
I actually listened to this one, and it was it was a great book to listen to.
It's a fantastic read. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, this is quite an array of books, of topics. You know, and just listening to you talk about your organization and your volunteer work that you do, especially this time of year. We're filming this right before Thanksgiving, and you know, you have that on your mind. You know, what are we thankful for? And this, you know, listening to you speak, and you know, reading books. You know, there's so many things we have to be thankful
Yeah,
for.
you know, Dag Hammarskjöld said, Dag Hammarskjöld was a Nobel laureate and head of the UN, killed in a plane crash, tragically, and said, all I want out of life is to be kinder, gentler, and to love more. And around this period of time,
Yeah,
really
you can't go wrong with that.
No, no.
And I'm going to end with that, because I can't top that one, that quote. John, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
And I thank you all for watching. And you know, we wish all of you the best of the holidays to come. We'll be back next year. Thanks for joining us.